Okay, thank you. So welcome everyone to our presentation, Inspiring Collective Action Through Interdisciplinary and Cross-Departmental Collaboration. Apologies in advance. I am currently in Japan and it's 1:45 a.m., so I won't be as loud as I usually am, but I'll do my best to be as articulate as I can. But please let me know if I could be a little louder and I'll do my best to accommodate.
All right, yeah. So good morning, good afternoon, wherever it is you folks are joining from. My name is Christian Isbister. I'm Métis on my dad's side, mixed European on my mom's side, born in Treaty 7 territory, but currently living as an uninvited guest on Syilx Okanagan territory, where I work as the Indigenous Initiatives Librarian at UBC Okanagan Library. Over to you, Jane.
And hi everyone, I'm Jane Jun. I'm an uninvited guest usually on the unceded ancestral and stolen lands of the Syilx Okanagan Nation. I'm the Southern Medical Program Librarian and Liaison Librarian for Health and Exercise Sciences and Interim Liaison for Nursing at the University of British Columbia Okanagan campus. Oh, sorry.
Thanks, Jane. Hi, everyone. It's so nice to see so many familiar names in the chat. For those who don't know me, my name is Donna Langille. My pronouns are she and they, and I'm a queer settler scholar living on the unceded territory of the Syilx Okanagan Nation. I'm the open education librarian as well as the subject librarian for film studies, media studies, theater, and digital humanities at the University of British Columbia, Okanagan.
And in this presentation, we're going to be speaking to the organizing process of 2 cases of success and our role as librarians, how we'll measure success, and elaborate on our hopes for this panel event and subsequent collaborations. And the first case will be on Indigenous data sovereignty in the context of health research, and the second will be for Orange Shirt Day programming.
All right, so we thought it would be helpful to talk a little bit about collaboration in an Indigenous context. I think most folks are already familiar with collaboration writ large. But the key thing that comes out when you're working with Indigenous partners is the importance of reciprocity. This is something that's been well established in the literature since 1991, a really famous article that talks about the 4 R's in Indigenous post-secondary. But what's really important here is ensuring that relationships are based in mutual respect, in mutual understanding, and in mutual benefit. I think it's also really helpful. We're going to show the importance of recognizing expertise as it exists within the room or as it exists within collaborators and partners. And then these questions of what work should be done by non-Indigenous folks, what learning can be done by non-Indigenous partners, and then what kinds of work should be led by Indigenous folks in the collaboration. So these are kind of the key themes that are pervasive throughout our talk. Go ahead, Jane. Oh, you're muted, Jane.
Thank you. So for the Indigenous Data Sovereignty panel for health research, here's a diagram that kind of attempts to illustrate the organizing process. So as the folks we collaborated with were existing relationships we had formed from attending events or volunteering together, we were able to meet casually over coffee to bring together the potential planning team. And we will speak to this existing relationships piece again later in the presentation. And this collaboration was with a couple of folks from the Faculty of Health and Social Development. Donna, the Open Education Librarian at UBCO, who's presenting here with us today, and myself. And we brainstormed what our goals for the panel were, which were mainly to bring forth discussions on health, science, and well-being related research and anti-Indigenous racism, as well as have the opportunity to listen to Indigenous panelists and or experts in supporting ethical and respectful research by, with, and for Indigenous peoples, and or researchers in health disciplines who practice Indigenous data sovereignty. So together, we put together an application for funding of an Indigenous data sovereignty panel in the context of health sciences research. And as we waited, we went back to brainstorming in the instance that the funding might fail. However, as indicated in blue, the funds were approved and we reached out to our multiple networks of relationships to seek our panelists. And from there, we went back and forth with details on the logistics, the event structure, and other preparation needed for the event, which is actually set to take place in the fall of this year. And that anything but straight line at the end of the event stage is to indicate that our relationships following the event do not just end, but continue in undetermined and unexpected ways. And of course, as indicated by that backwards arrow, this is just to show that it's an iterative process that can always head back to the brainstorming or other stages. And I'll now pass it off to my colleague Donna to talk about how we intend to measure success.
Thanks, Jane. So in academic libraries, we often measure the success of our programming using quantitative methods. So, for example, counting the number of reference interactions or patron visits or how many courses we've taught. And while this is usually necessary for reporting to university administration, it almost never conveys or emphasizes the relationship building that is necessary for collaborative initiatives. And so our attempt to address this challenge is by using a mixed methods approach and trying to align our methods with the goal of the event. So for example, one of our goals is to foster a space of reflection regarding the ethics of research as it relates to Indigenous peoples. And to understand if we met this goal, we'll be collecting qualitative data as well from attendees, panelists, and organizers through the use of post-event surveys. And the data from the survey can be useful for creating a more robust narrative of the event, including information about what people took away from the event, as well as the lessons that they learned by attending. If you don't mind going to the next slide, Jane. So many of us are probably currently feeling the negative impacts of budget cuts and heavy workloads. Collaboration can allow us to grow our capacity by leveraging other people's expertise, outreach, and resources across multiple departments. So for example, for our Indigenous Data Sovereignty panel, we are able to redistribute the administrative tasks to avoid this type of what is often invisible labor falling onto just one person. And so in turn, each of us is able to offer more time and space for the creative processes of this project that we enjoy, like brainstorming and discussion. Another enjoyable aspect to the project is getting the chance to work with people who we might not otherwise work with. So despite being a smaller university, many librarians and academics at UBCO still work in silos. So in my role, I rarely have the opportunity to work with faculty and students in health departments, despite learning how much we have in common. And our shared interest in information equity and Indigenous data sovereignty is really the motivation that underpins this project, rather than our obligations to our specific work portfolios. Our goal is that our conversations won't end after the project has ended or the event has ended, but that this collaboration will strengthen existing relationships with our colleagues, which may lead to future possibilities. On to you, Christian, I think.
Yeah, so I'm going to talk a little bit about the Orange Shirt Day programming that we did the last year. Unlike the panel that my colleagues were talking about, this was really a sort of a loose network of different events that came together around a really important day. And so really, like I said, it's sort of an attempt to get multiple opportunities for folks to get involved, whether those are students, staff, faculty, or even community members sometimes. We did some very classically librarian things like a book display, and we helped to run a book club. We had an exhibit from the Legacy of Hope Foundation, which is a nonprofit Indigenous organization that raises awareness around residential schools, 60 Scoop. And we offered a few guided tours of this exhibit. And then we had an Orange Shirt Day sort of crafting table and displayed those shirts around campus. That's that super amateur picture that I took along the right-hand side there. I think one of the sort of the key through lines throughout this was the importance of considering the lived experiences of Indigenous students who might be coming through the library space, recognizing that this is a really emotional time for lots of folks. And so trying to balance the sort of desire to educate, to make these events visible for folks on campus, while also giving Indigenous students the space to still come into the library without being potentially re-traumatized or forced to confront these histories. You can go to the next slide, Jane. One of the things that's super important in Indigenous relationship building is the importance of building that relationship well in advance of any work that you hope to do. It's really important that you don't reach out to folks, especially Indigenous folks, the moment you need help, but you build that relationship early and you maintain that often. If there's any hockey fans out in the audience here, let's go Oilers. A lot of my relationships with the folks at the Indigenous Student Center are built through like gentle teasing about the playoffs. And so finding ways to build and maintain those kind of personal relationships that also feed into the work that you can do makes partnerships, collaborations so much easier and sort of more enjoyable to work through. I'd be remiss if I didn't thank all of my partners here. And so really important to note, I worked with folks from the library, of course, but we also worked with colleagues from the Center for Scholarly Communications. We worked with the Indigenous Programs and Services, the Indigenous Student Center on campus. We worked with the Center for Teaching and Learning, as well as the Sexual Violence Prevention and Response Office. So really a fulsome collaboration from multiple different units across campus. And jump to the next slide. Like Donna mentioned, it's kind of a challenge sometimes to determine how you can measure success through these sort of quantitative data points that report really well. And so I kind of tried to pull a couple of things here. We did receive really positive feedback from the Legacy of Hope exhibit. We ultimately decided to run 6 guided tours of this exhibit and heard good things from folks who were able to take those tours. We ended up crafting well over 100 paper orange shirts, which was way more than I could have possibly hoped for, which was incredible. And like we said, we were able to display those around campus. And I think for me, one of the key sort of measures of success of this project is that I'm able to continue to work with the same folks. And so the experience of working through this really challenging, emotionally challenging day was positive enough that we're going to continue work ongoing. And jump to the next slide. This is something that we talked about earlier as well, but the importance of working collaboratively can really lessen the emotional toll that challenging days can bring to any one individual person. So kind of this idea of self-care through community support. This is a picture that my colleague named Cardinal and I were taking of my colleague named Cardinal and I as we were doing those tours. What was really nice is we're able to lean on each other if we had sort of a challenging experience, or if we needed a break, or take a couple minutes to ourselves. Yeah, it can just be really important to build those sort of collaborative relationships there. You can jump to the next slide. And then looking at sort of these lasting impacts, not in addition to the actual benefits of the work itself, the act of working on these collaborations can help to strengthen that relationship, which only then leads to more partnerships in the future. I think in libraries, sometimes we wonder what we bring to collaborations. And I think one of the ways that we can demonstrate being in good relation with folks, whether those are Indigenous colleagues or otherwise, is by giving our time, is by volunteering, is by showing up to these spaces. So that's one of the positive lasting impacts here. And then just reiterating what Donna said earlier, work like this absolutely is not the endpoint. It's just one other sort of element of that ongoing relationship building effort between the work that I do in the library and folks on campus. Over to you, Jane.
Thank you. So I'll now touch briefly on a literature review. So in the literature on collaborative, interdisciplinary, or cross-campus or multi-institutional efforts to advance EDI with lasting impact in post-secondary education, we found ties into the points myself and my colleagues made regarding the process and lasting impact of collaborative work. And I want to emphasize again that these relationships are not created on an as-needed basis, but rather actively and intentionally sought out and maintained regardless of whether you have a project or an event to plan or work on together. So a couple of the articles that stood out are listed on this slide, and I'll just be noting a couple of quotes quickly from each. So from the first article titled "Collaborating to Remove Barriers to Success," it was mentioned that understanding the campus community, the identification of key participants, and thoughtful tailored outreach to specific programs, services, and units are key steps in the construction and maintenance of effective campus partnerships. And this quote speaks to the developing partnerships not on an as-needed basis, but rather from the get-go. And the second is from an article titled "Capacity Building for Shared Equity Leadership," where it reads, "Collective capacity building helps groups of leaders learn how to work together effectively across differences and in solidarity. Collective capacity building strategies include professional learning communities and communities of practices, affinity groups, and healing circles." And this speaks to the distribution and sharing of work that allows for increased capacity, as well as an improved work environment through fostering these kinds of relationships. And other relevant resources can be found in our references section in the slides if you're interested. So yeah, we just like to end with dedications, as acknowledging contributions to collaborative work is incredibly important to emphasize this is a collective effort. So for the Indigenous Data Sovereignty panel for health research, we'd like to acknowledge first Natalia Gallo, EDI coordinator in the Faculty of Health and Social Development, who is key to starting relationships with several panelists, and Rishma Chunidas, who has extensive experience in organizing large-scale events, as assistant professor of teaching and nursing and advisor to the dean of the Faculty of Health and Social Development on EDI.
And there's so many people I would like to thank for the work in supporting the Orange Shirt Day programming, but specifically, I'd like to thank Naim Cardinal, who's an educational facilitator at Indigenous Programs and Services. I'd like to thank Kiara Brody and Johanna Black, both working at the Sexual Violence Prevention and Response Office, and Christy Baxter at the Center for Scholarly Communication. And then really just to close up here, sort of our thematic through line throughout this talk, which is that collective action is really important. One of the ways that we can build a more sustainable future for libraries and librarians.
But yeah, thank you for listening, and we're open to questions as time permits.